City of the Black Triangle, Island of the Broken Mirror. Chapter 1. The Scanning. The cameras were already live when Dr. Elizabeth Carter stepped up to the podium. She wasn't a politician, though the crowd gathered like it was a campaign speech. The glass dome above her shimmered under soft lights, and in the background, the world's flags hung in silence. She adjusted the corner of her blazer and looked straight ahead. "This is not a trial," she began. "This is a turning point." Broadcasts flared across every global news channel. The caption read, "Live, Global Psychological Alliance Announcement." Behind her, on a transparent monitor, a young man sat in a chair, calm and charming. His name was Stephen Morgan, and a year ago he'd been one of the world's most admired entrepreneurs. A tech CEO, philanthropist, social media darling. Now he was the first public subject of the Empathy Index scan. A metallic dome hummed above his head. Its surface rippled faintly, like a disturbed lake. Neural mapping lights scanned his prefrontal cortex, limbic system, and mirror neuron clusters. Dr. Carter continued, her voice firm but composed. "For generations, we misread predators as leaders. We rewarded charm. We called their ruthlessness vision, their lies ambition." A quiet wave passed over the audience. "Science has evolved. We now have tools to measure empathy and emotional resonance in real time. We can detect the dark triad traits before they harm again. Narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, not as metaphors, but as neurological facts." Stephen smiled as if on cue. It was perfect, calculated. The scan's results appeared behind him, glowing red across 3 points of the cerebral map. Empathy Index, 3%. Dark Triad, Risk, Critical, Containment, Recommendation, TUZ1. The crowd didn't gasp. They'd expected this, but still, it hit. Watching someone go from public idol to classified predator felt like staring at the ghost of a former reality. Dr. Carter took a moment. She glanced at Stephen, who gave her a small, smug wave. Then she turned back to the camera. "Let me be clear," she said. "We do not hate them. Many were shaped by trauma. We acknowledge that. But trauma does not excuse harm. And when that harm becomes systemic, we must act." Behind her, the massive screen shifted. It now showed a shimmering, triangular island rising from the ocean. Black, geometric, unnaturally perfect. The Triad Urban Initiative Zone, codenamed TUZ1, also known to the public as the Black Triangle, will be a sovereign facility. It is not a prison. There are no cells. But those with confirmed high dark triad profiles will be relocated there permanently. Stephen's expression changed just slightly. For the first time, he looked uncertain. The residents will have food, shelter, space, but they will no longer walk among the innocent. They will no longer rise through systems they were born to corrupt. A woman in the front row, a journalist, raised a hand. "Dr. Carter, some say this violates human rights." Dr. Carter nodded, unflinching, "and others say it protects the millions they've harmed. This isn't about punishment, it's about pattern recognition. We have lived for too long inside a cycle of abuse." She looked into the camera as if speaking directly to every survivor watching from home. "You were not weak, you were targeted." On the screen, the island rotated slowly, black ocean swirling around it like ink. Each of the 3 points of the triangle lit up in color-coded districts. One for narcissists, one for manipulators, one for the cold and violent. At the center stood a colossal black pyramid, dark as obsidian. Stephen's voice echoed across the hall. "So I'm to be exiled?" he asked, standing now. "For being exceptional?" "No," Dr. Carter replied. "For being incapable of connection, for mimicking empathy without ever meaning it." Security approached him, but Stephen lifted his hands and smiled. "No need," he said. "I'll go willingly. I look forward to building something beautiful there. Better minds. No dead weight." He walked with the calm of a man headed to his coronation. Dr. Carter watched him disappear through the glass doors, then turned back to the crowd. "This is not the end of freedom," she said. "This is its beginning." Chapter 2. Volunteers of Greatness. The media called it the next step in human evolution. From their luxury condos and studio-lit penthouses, dozens of high-profile figures publicly volunteered to relocate to TUZ-1, the Black Triangle. They framed it as a migration of genius. In exclusive interviews, sleek documentaries, and dramatic farewell live streams, they boasted about leaving behind a world of weak emotions and sentimental parasites to build a society of strength, logic, and ambition. Stephen Morgan's departure had become a meme. Sunglasses on, collar popped, stepping into the shuttle as if he were boarding a private yacht. The clip was replayed with inspirational music and taglines like, "Only the strong belong." "Goodbye, empathy. Hello, excellence." By week 3, over 600 volunteers had arrived at the boarding station, screened, scanned, and confirmed for relocation. They didn't care. They wanted to go. Inside Terminal Echo, the walls were clean and white, pulsing gently with soft blue ambient lighting. Everything was polished to perfection, a mirror of how the volunteers saw themselves. Stephen Morgan stood near the boarding tunnel, scrolling through a news feed full of himself. "Front page again," he said, smirking. Beside him, a woman in a crimson suit touched up her makeup with an app-linked mirror. Her name was Claire Dalton, former political consultant and tactical media strategist. She had made her fortune manipulating public opinion and her enemies. She didn't smile as she spoke. "Enjoy it. Won't last long." Stephen turned. "You think we won't be legends over there?" "I think you still need someone to clap when you talk," she said coolly. He stared at her for a beat, then gave a slow grin. "That's what I like about you, Claire. No illusions. Just knives." Claire didn't reply. She slid her device into her pocket and walked ahead, heels clicking. Stephen followed, nodding to the cameras one last time. "Document it well," he said to the press. "History's happening." The ship, TUZ Shuttle 001, was sleek, silent, and eerily sterile inside. 48 passengers, every one of them classified by the Global Psychological Alliance as high risk. Yet it felt like a private jet launch party. A man in designer glasses offered drinks. A few influencers were already filming introduction videos for their followers, all of whom were now behind a digital firewall, unable to contact them ever again. Claire sat alone, reviewing satellite data of the island. She'd memorized the layout before accepting exile. 3 districts, the Apex, the Narcissists sector, built for aesthetics, status, and image. The Web, the Strategists' zone, for those who lived on manipulation and social currency. The Pit, for those whose only language was control through fear. And in the center, the Black Pyramid, a symbol of ambition and delusion. No laws, no hierarchy, no victims to exploit. She didn't believe half the people on the shuttle knew what they were walking into. As the ship descended, Stephen pressed his face to the curved glass. The island was stunning. From the air, it looked like a massive black sigil floating on the sea. Each edge of the triangle glowed faintly, bordered with illuminated structures and angular pathways. Palm trees, modern towers, reflective pools. It looked like a tech utopia. Claire didn't even glance up. "Enjoy the view," she muttered. "It's probably the last beautiful thing you'll ever see." Stephen leaned back in his seat. "You're too negative. We're going to build something better than the old world. stronger. "You still think you're going to be king, don't you?" she asked. "I don't need to be king," he said. "Just admired." The ship landed with a gentle hum. No applause, no ceremony. The doors hissed open. They stepped onto polished stone, smooth black basalt tiles arranged in perfect lines. The air was warm, salty, clean. Ocean waves echoed softly in the distance. Digital panels blinked awake at each checkpoint. Face scans, ID tags, personal district assignments. A robotic voice greeted them. "Welcome to TU's 1. Freedom begins with truth. Cooperation is optional. Surveillance is constant. You are not alone." Stephen laughed. "That's not creepy at all." Claire walked ahead without a word, her eyes scanning the entrance corridors, noting every blind spot, every camera, every vantage point. She didn't plan to survive this place, she planned to run it. As the gates sealed behind them, the volunteers were directed to their respective districts. Some hugged, some made deals on the spot. A few already began scouting allies. Stephen waved to a group of influencers heading toward the apex. "I give it a week," he said to no one in particular, "before I'm running the place." Claire didn't look back. She whispered to herself as she disappeared into the web. "Let them fight over mirrors. I'll take the shadows." Chapter 3. The Assigned. The volunteers had come with smiles and camera crews. The assigned came in chains. Not literal, but social. Silent, watched, dismissed. They arrived by the second shuttle, 6 days after the broadcast. No media, no applause. Just the hum of rotors and the cold acknowledgement of exile. Zach Turner leaned back in his seat, arms stretched wide, boot resting on the edge of the opposite row. The guards didn't speak to him. They knew better. His rap sheet spanned 3 continents. Arson, assault, psychological torture, 2 missing persons investigations, both unresolved. No convictions. But the empathy index didn't care about courtrooms. Zach had scored 0%, a flat line, not even a flicker. Across from him sat a woman in her early 30s, stiff posture, eyes calculating. Her name was Claire Dalton, though the manila folder in front of her read High DTP, Level 2 Strategic. She'd requested reassignment to a later transport, but the Global Psychological Alliance had denied it. She wasn't a volunteer. She had been diagnosed. "Don't talk to me," she said without looking up. Zach grinned. "Wasn't planning on it, sweetheart." He tapped the back of the seat rhythmically, a habit with no rhythm, just sound. Agitation as ambient noise. A few rows up, another passenger, a young man in a suit with trembling hands, whispered to the security officer beside him. "Is this a mistake? I'm not one of them. I'm not dangerous. I've never hurt anyone." The officer didn't respond. He just locked the restraint and turned away. The scan results didn't lie. The second shuttle touched down at night. No welcome lights, no ceremony. Only the automated voice repeated in the docking bay. "Welcome to TUZ-1. You are entering a sovereign behavioral territory. Assistance is limited. You are responsible for your own survival." The doors opened. The assigned stepped out onto cold, black stone. The scent of salt water and something faintly chemical filled the air. Towers loomed in the distance. Silent, empty, perfect. Stephen Morgan was waiting near the boundary of the apex, sipping from a thermos and smirking. He waved lazily. "Welcome to paradise." Claire ignored him. Zach gave a mock salute. Stephen's smile faltered when Zach didn't break eye contact. He turned and walked off, back to his curated haven of mirrors and admiration. As the new residents were processed, Claire received her reassignment, back to the web. She was already calculating entry points. Zach was sent to the pit, of course. no questions asked. Others stood still, confused, adrift. There were no instructions, no guides, no systems to help them, no rules, just geography. One man tried to walk back toward the ship. A drone hovered down and flashed a red beam across his chest. He didn't move again. Later, in a dim corridor of the web, Claire found an unmonitored access panel and pulled a tiny device from her sleeve. A transmitter. She placed it on the wall, synced it to her neural implant, and whispered a single word: observation. She didn't know who would hear it, if anyone, but if the outside world was still watching, she wanted them to see what was coming, because TUS-1 wasn't a containment zone. It was a mirror, and soon it would shatter. Meanwhile, in the pit, Zach Turner walked through rows of concrete slabs and blacked-out windows. Someone shouted in the distance, a scream, then laughter. He found a broken piece of rebar and slipped it into his sleeve. He smiled to himself. No cops, no rules, no feelings. He looked up at the looming black pyramid in the center of the island. So tall it swallowed the moonlight. Guess it's time to build a kingdom. Chapter 4. Welcome to the Triangle. There was no dawn in the Black Triangle. The sun rose, yes, but it never felt like morning. The air was always heavy, like it knew what kind of people breathed it. The sea that surrounded the island was perfectly calm, unnaturally so, as if nature itself kept its distance. The first week was chaos, masked as calm. The volunteers had settled into their sectors. The assigned had vanished into corners, watching, waiting. No one knew how long the supplies would last. No one asked. At the center of it all, the Black Pyramid rose, impossibly large, its surface a matte obsidian that didn't reflect light, only absorbed it. It was unfinished, hollow at the top, as if it had been designed that way on purpose, like a crown that no one could wear. Stephen Morgan walked through the main plaza of the Apex, sunglasses on, shirt unbuttoned halfway, flanked by two followers who had already started calling him Prime. He liked that. The Apex was the most developed sector, glass towers, fountains, color-changing walls that adjusted to your aura, which was really just an algorithm tracking body heat and facial movement. Everyone here smiled, loudly. Stephen made his morning rounds, complimenting outfits, suggesting partnerships, spreading passive insults. He stood on a bench and called out to a small crowd. The outside world didn't understand us, but here, image is truth. Power is presentation. Let's build the future, beautiful, branded, and bold. Applause followed, but no one was really listening. They were all thinking of their next move. Behind the fake grins, alliances were forming. So were plots. In the web, Claire Dalton sat in a quiet room built from a repurposed control station. Her desk was clean, her network was not. She had already traced the surveillance patterns of the island's drones. They moved in a figure 8 over each district, leaving a 9-minute blind spot every third pass. More than enough time to talk or kill. A map of the island glowed on the screen before her, marked with soft red circles. Each dot was a resident with high influence potential. She didn't want friends. She wanted leverage. A voice chimed in from her compad. "Dalton, we have contact. One of the Apex twins is willing to trade footage for supplies." She smiled faintly. Start a rumor about Stephen planning a merger, then leak it to the pit. Her assistant laughed. "Chaos before breakfast. I missed this." Meanwhile, Zach Turner stood in a pit fight ring, shirtless, bleeding, laughing. The pit was a war zone dressed up as a slum. Concrete towers, rusted metal scaffolding, shattered lights blinking like dying stars. Fires burned in barrels, not for warmth, just for the mood. Zach hadn't come to observe. He'd come to dominate. He grabbed his opponent, a wiry ex-military type, and slammed him into the concrete wall. Cheers erupted. A drone hovered above the ring, scanning vital signs. It didn't intervene. Zach raised both fists, grinning like a wolf. No rules, baby. Only ranking. That's how power worked here. Status wasn't claimed through words or manipulation. It was taken, and he was taking fast. That evening, all 3 sectors lit up as the Black Pyramid activated for the first time. The sky above it shimmered with a silent wave, a pulse of data invisible to the naked eye but picked up by every device on the island. A voice echoed through the comm systems of every resident. Observation level, Phase 1 complete. Initiating psychological saturation protocol. Emotional variables unrestricted. Authority self-determined. No one understood what it meant, but the message was clear. You're on your own. Back in the web, Claire sat at her terminal watching footage from the Apex. Stephen was on camera speaking to a crowd again. More charisma, more theater. But something had changed. Behind him, people weren't clapping. They were recording him. The supply shipments haven't come yet, one woman said quietly in the video. If this place is so great, why are we rationing protein bars? Why is the power flickering? Why do I feel watched all the time? Claire paused the footage. Cracks, she thought. Beautiful. That night, on a rooftop in the Apex, Stephen stood alone for the first time. He looked up at the pyramid. It pulsed again, soft and slow like a giant breathing in the dark. He'd told himself this place would be his empire, but there was something wrong here. Everyone was trying to rise, but no one was looking up. They were watching each other. This isn't a city, he muttered. It's a mirror maze. And somewhere deep inside the pyramid, a light flickered on for the first time. A soft red glow from within the hollow crown. Chapter 5. The first fracture. It began with a broken mirror, not metaphorical, literal. In one of the Apex's public towers, someone shattered a full-length display wall during a shouting match over influence seating at a brunch table. The shattering echoed down the glass corridor like a gunshot. No one cleaned it up. By that afternoon, 8 people had left the Apex Plaza to stake claims in empty buildings closer to the pyramid. They called it a rebrand. Stephen Morgan called it a betrayal. He paced inside his suite, a penthouse of reflective black tile and curved walls that showed his face from every angle. He stood between 2 assistants, both nervous, both nodding too quickly. They don't respect hierarchy, Stephen said, adjusting his collar. I gave them structure. They want chaos. They think it's weakness, said one, to follow someone. No, Stephen snapped. They just forgot what a leader looks like. Outside, screens once filled with Stephen's face now showed dozens of new channels, each resident broadcasting their own vision for the Apex. Everyone wanted to be followed, but no one wanted to follow. In the web, Claire Dalton watched it unfold like a well-written tragedy. She sipped cold coffee and zoomed in on the rooftop live streams. Stephen was losing control when fast. The moment he tried to punish dissenters, 4 influencers united against him and declared him emotionally unstable. One of them even cried on camera, saying he'd created a culture of aesthetic oppression. Claire grinned. So predictable. Want us to feed the fire? Asked her assistant. No, she said. It's burning on its own. Let's redirect. She turned her attention to the pit. Zach Turner was building an army. Not officially. Nothing here was. But word was spreading fast. Fighters, enforcers, smugglers, all gathering around him. He wasn't interested in broadcasts or speeches. He let others talk while he acted. When someone tried to poison his food, he found them 2 hours later and made an example out of them. Bare hands, bare teeth, bare rage. The drones didn't interfere. Zack stood over the body, breathing hard, then looked directly at the camera lens hovering above him. "You watching, Doc?" he said. "This your peace project." The message made it to Dr. Elizabeth Carter's private feed. She watched from a secure office somewhere far from the ocean, the black triangle a silent icon on the screen before her. "Zack Turner is escalating," said a voice behind her. "We can't intervene," she replied. "The protocol was clear." "This isn't containment anymore. It's becoming a stage." She didn't look away. Maybe that's what it always was. By the end of the week, the Apex had split into 4 factions. One group declared itself the pure brand. Only those with verified admiration scores above 90% could join. Another moved underground, calling itself the mirrorless. They believed true superiority meant rejecting all need for reflection, literal or social. Stephen's original circle, now weakened, tried to offer reunification. They were laughed out of the plaza. Meanwhile, the web pulsed with encrypted deals and silent betrayals. Claire launched a blackmail exchange market. She didn't call it that. She called it a truth token network. People uploaded footage, secrets, emotional confessions, all to be traded later for favors or protection. No one trusted anyone. Everyone participated. Then came the explosion. A supply station on the southern edge of the pit detonated during a handoff. No casualties, but the message was clear. Someone had access to explosives and no one was safe. Stephen called an emergency council. No one showed up. Claire received 3 offers for weaponized drone software in under an hour. Zack didn't respond to any inquiries. He simply sent a short video of himself holding a severed drone camera and smiling. At the center of the island, the black pyramid pulsed again, brighter this time. For a moment, the lights in every sector flickered. A new message echoed through all devices. Phase 2, identity saturation active. Mirror threshold breached. Psychosocial collapse imminent. Observation continues. Stephen stood alone in his suite, staring into a mirror that no longer reflected. His face was there, but something about it didn't look right. It was still smiling, even though he wasn't. Chapter 6. Mirror Test. The mirrors stopped working on a Thursday. Not all at once, just in small, unsettling ways. First, it was a delay, a half-second lag between movement and reflection. Then came distortion, faces stretched, smiles twisted. Some mirrors returned images from hours ago. In the apex, panic spread like a dropped wine glass. "I'm not distorted," one woman insisted, tears in her eyes. "I don't look like that." Stephen Morgan stood in his suite, fists clenched as his face morphed before him, growing older, then younger, then blank. He turned off every screen in the room. They turned back on by themselves. Elsewhere in the web, Claire Dalton received a private alert from her neural implant. PSI alert. Emotional instability rising in apex sector. User cluster. Narcissistic collapse detected. Recommended action. Exploit or isolate. She didn't even blink. She opened a new channel and sent a single ping to her closest informant in the pit. "Apex breaking. Tell Zack it's time to collect." No reply. The pit wasn't breaking. It was sharpening. Zack Turner had taken over an entire storage facility on the east rim of the district. He renamed it The Forge. The walls were lined with makeshift weapons, repurposed drones, and a growing supply of black market tech smuggled from the web in exchange for protection. He wasn't interested in symbolism or speeches. He was interested in walls and bodies. Back in the apex, the breakdown reached a tipping point when someone live-streamed themselves smashing every reflective surface in their apartment, sobbing, "I don't want to see myself anymore. It's lying. It's lying." Dozens followed suit. Stephen tried to calm the crowds, his voice shaky on the plaza's central speaker system. "This is a technical issue," he said. "Just a glitch. Don't feed into the hysteria." Someone threw a chair through a monitor behind him. He didn't flinch, not publicly, but later, alone, he sat in front of a mirror that refused to show anything at all. No light, no face, just black. Dr. Elizabeth Carter watched it all from the control deck, buried beneath the mainland GPA facility. "It's working," said her colleague, adjusting the screen. "Phase 2 is behaving exactly as projected." Carter nodded. "How long until the saturation flips?" "Could be days, could be hours." "Keep the feed open. I want to see what happens when the illusion collapses." Back on the island, the black pyramid glowed red. Not a soft pulse, a steady burn. Its structure no longer appeared dormant. Thin slits of light ran down its sides like veins. Residents began avoiding it. Some claimed to hear whispering inside. Others said the walls showed them things. Memories, regrets, faces they didn't want to see. Claire sent drones to scan the pyramid's entrance. Each one returned with corrupted footage. Static audio loops of words spoken days earlier. People long dead. In a hidden substructure of the web, Claire finally gathered her 3 remaining trusted operators. She pointed to a display screen showing psychological data across the island. "Here's what we know," she said. "The mirrors aren't broken. The pyramid is reflecting something deeper. Not light, but memory, emotion, self-image." One of her team frowned. "So it's psychological warfare?" "No," Claire said. "It's psychological truth, and these people weren't built for it." Stephen Morgan tried a broadcast that night, the first in 2 days. His face was pale, his voice forced. "We are not defined by reflections. We are pioneers. We are the future. Don't let glitches rewrite who you are." No one tuned in. Everyone was watching themselves fall apart. In the pit, Zach Turner stared into a shard of reflective steel. He smirked at it, then turned it around and walked out. "Let 'em choke on their pretty lies," he muttered. "I've got fire." He sent out a single message to all districts. "The pyramid's open. Anyone strong enough to take it, meet me there." As the sun dipped behind the triangular skyline, the first group of armed residents began walking towards the center of the island. No one knew what was inside, but one thing had become clear. The mirrors weren't broken. They were finally showing the truth. Chapter 7, Apex Collapse. The fountains stopped running at dawn. No announcement, no warning, just silence. The hum of the recirculators cut off like a severed nerve. The polished streets of the apex were suddenly still, save for the low whine of a broken hologram blinking across the central plaza. "You are admired. You are the future. You are admired." The voice repeated in a soft loop, slightly glitched, slightly off. No one believed it anymore. Stephen Morgan stood at the balcony of his tower suite, staring at the empty plazas below. It had taken only 10 days for his empire to fracture, not from rebellion, not from war, but from irrelevance. The followers who once hung on his every word were now factionalized, bitter, or withdrawn. Some had fled to the web. Others joined the rising movement near the pyramid, attracted to Zach Turner's brutal charisma, or at least his certainty. Stephen hadn't slept in 2 nights. His last broadcast got 3 viewers, and now even the mirrors in his room had stopped trying to lie. They just showed him, tired, smaller than he remembered, sweating in perfect clothes. Down in the plaza, residents whispered in private corners, "We should leave the apex. There's no food left. Steven's just hoarding the leftovers. Have you seen the pyramid lately? I swear it's getting brighter." No one rules here anymore. We're all just actors without an audience. Someone projected a looped video of Steven's early speeches across the side of a tower, but overlaid it with cartoon horns and clown music. People laughed. They didn't stop. Claire Dalton watched from the web, perfectly calm. She sipped tea and tracked social cohesion scores on her screen. The apex had dropped below 15%. Influence currency, the only form of trade in that district, was now completely devalued. Claire's assistant leaned in. "Should we send agents to pick over what's left?" Claire didn't answer right away. She just stared at Steven's profile photo, once used in GPA propaganda for innovation awards. Now it looked like a missing person poster. "No," she said, "let him watch it fall." In the pit, Zach Turner was already moving. His scouts had found an abandoned storage hub between the apex and the central pyramid. Clean walls, usable power. By dusk, they'd raised flags bearing Turner's symbol, a shattered mask with a red eye behind it. Dozens arrived by nightfall. Fighters, outcasts, web defectors, even a few broken apex residents. They came with bruises, blackmail secrets, and broken egos. Zach welcomed them like a cult leader who didn't pretend it was love. "You want safety?" he said. "Then earn it. You want power? Then fight for it." Back in his suite, Steven tried one final act of control. He summoned his 2 remaining assistants. "We're launching a new platform," he said. "Forget influence scores. We build a truth-based merit system, real charisma, real admiration, no algorithms." The first assistant looked unsure. The second stared at the floor. Then the first one stood and walked out without a word. Steven didn't call after him. He just sat down and stared at the mirror across the room, the one still working, still pulsing with a soft, glitching red glow. He asked quietly, "Why didn't it work?" The mirror didn't answer, but his reflection leaned forward, just slightly. Not a glitch, not lag. It leaned before he did. He stumbled backward, heart racing. The mirror cracked, not from impact, from within. A single fracture line down the center, his face split in 2. Elsewhere, Dr. Elizabeth Carter watched the broadcast from the control facility. Her hands trembled just slightly. "He's nearing collapse," her aide said. "What do we do?" "Nothing," Carter replied. "This is the final test." "Test of what?" She looked up. "If the predator can survive without prey." That night, Steven left his tower. No announcement, no entourage, just footsteps. He walked through the empty apex, past abandoned spas, flickering displays, broken drone ports. He crossed the main walkway toward the pyramid and found Zach Turner already waiting at the base. Zach didn't speak. Steven stood there for a long time. Finally, he asked, "What do you see when you look in?" Zach grinned. "A crown." They entered together. The door to the Black Pyramid slid open without a sound. The city watched. No one followed. Chapter 8. Truth from the Outside. The world didn't collapse when they left. In fact, it healed. Quietly. Slowly, but undeniably. 6 months after the last dark Triad exile was processed, global violence had dropped by 42%. Fraud cases fell by half. Whistleblower protection laws surged. A new generation of teachers, counselors, and young leaders began rising, not because they shouted the loudest, but because they listened the longest. The world didn't miss them, it just breathed deeper without them. Dr. Elizabeth Carter sat at her usual place, Inside the GPA observation chamber, high above the Atlantic coast, the island's feed played silently on the screen before her, aerial shots of the Black Triangle, its sharp edges glowing faintly beneath cloud cover. A younger researcher approached, tablet in hand. "Global Empathy Index is up 7 points this quarter," she said. Carter nodded, half-focused. "And the projection? If current trends hold, interrelational trust will surpass pre-collapse levels within 2 years." "Even after everything?" "Because of everything," the researcher replied. "People finally believe each other again." Back on the ground, outside the polished walls of government labs and broadcast centers, communities were changing. In a small town in Oregon, a group of domestic violence survivors opened a trauma recovery center. In Kenya, a school installed emotional literacy classes alongside mathematics, teaching children how to name their feelings before they learned to divide numbers. In Tokyo, a political party swept elections by promising transparency, collective healing, and zero tolerance for psychological abuse. The world had learned a brutal truth. Charisma without compassion is a weapon. And for the first time in history, it acted on that knowledge. Carter gave a televised interview, her first since the launch of TUZ-1. The host leaned in. "Some say what you've done is unethical, that empathy scans violate free will, that exile is inhumane." Carter paused, then answered gently, "We didn't punish them. We protected those they preyed on." She folded her hands. For decades, victims were told they were too sensitive, too weak, too dramatic. We built systems that rewarded emotional detachment, called it leadership. And in doing so, we trained wolves to walk on 2 legs and smile. The host hesitated. "Do you believe they can change?" "I believe some want to," Carter said, "but most only change when they lose their audience." Far from the cameras in the rural edges of Arizona, a woman named Hannah Mills sat on her porch, watching her son draw chalk lines on the concrete. She had once been married to a man who never raised his voice, only lowered it, just enough to make her question reality, who didn't hit, but erased, until she forgot who she was. He was in the triangle now, classified high DTP, Machiavellian leaning, no appeals. Hannah hadn't spoken publicly. She didn't want attention. But every time she looked at her child and saw no fear in his eyes, no hypervigilance, no self-blame, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. "Let them have their island," she whispered. "We have our lives back." In New York, a documentary titled Predators in Suits premiered to standing ovations. It followed the rise and fall of Stephen Morgan. From tech icon to self-exiled narcissist to silent resident of a city with no admirers left. One clip became viral. Stephen filmed during his final weeks in the apex, staring into a mirror that showed nothing. "If no one's watching," he says in the clip, voice hollow, "do I still exist?" The audience didn't laugh. They just understood. Back at the GPA facility, Carter stood at the window watching the clouds roll over the sea. Her aide returned with an update. "New petition circulating to expand the protocol. People want TUZ-2 for financial predators, political manipulators, even corrupt executives." Carter didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. "We're not building prisons," she said softly. "We're just recognizing patterns." "And what happens if the world forgets?" Carter turned to her. Her eyes were tired but unshaken. "Then history repeats. That's how it always begins. Not with monsters, with charm." She pressed a button on the wall, and the screen shifted to a live feed of the island. At the center, the black pyramid still glowed, dim now like a dying furnace. No one approached it anymore, no one left it either. It simply was. A monument to what happens when the audience finally walks away. Chapter 9. The pit takes over. The black flags rose just after midnight. They were crude, stitched from tarp and wire, but unmistakable. A shattered mask with a red eye. The symbol of Zach Turner's rule. By morning, they flew over half of the pit and 1/3 of the apex. There was no war. There didn't need to be. The others surrendered before the fight began. Zach had built his regime the way a fire builds heat. Slowly, then all at once. He didn't offer hope. He offered certainty. And in a world where no one trusted anything, that was enough. "You want peace?" he said in his last public broadcast. "Then kneel or bleed." No one laughed anymore. His voice wasn't charming, it was final. The apex fell because it had no spine. The remaining factions collapsed under fear and fatigue. The influence boards went dark. A handful of content creators defected to the web, trying to broker deals for safety. One by one, buildings were emptied and absorbed. Stephen Morgan had vanished weeks ago, last seen entering the Black Pyramid. Some said he was dead. Others said he was watching. No one really cared anymore. Claire Dalton watched the spread of Turner's forces with cold calculation. From her stronghold in the web, she studied real-time heat maps, drone activity, and supply routes. The data was clear. Zach wasn't just taking territory, he was consolidating control. "He's using Apex tech," her assistant said. "Hacked into their drone systems, security grids too." "Let him," Claire replied. "We only need one thing from him." "Which is?" She pointed to the glowing triangle in the center of the map. The pyramid. At the base of the obsidian monolith, Zach stood with 10 of his fighters. No more camera crews, no more vanity speeches, just silence and shadow. He touched the smooth wall. It was warm. Inside, the pyramid had changed. The lower levels had expanded, corridors branching like veins lit by red pulses that had no source. Zach had walked deeper than anyone before him, and he wasn't afraid. He entered the inner chamber that night. Only one other person stood there, Stephen Morgan, unshaven, thin, pale, but his eyes still held a flicker of something familiar, something dangerous. "You stayed," Zach said. Stephen didn't look up. "Where would I go?" Zach walked slowly around the room. Symbols etched into the walls now pulsed like heartbeats. The room felt alive, watching, listening, remembering. "What is this place?" Zach asked. Stephen finally spoke. "It's not a building, it's a mirror, the kind that doesn't break." Zach laughed once. "That's supposed to scare me." "No," Stephen said, "but you'll wish it had." Back on the surface, Claire initiated Protocol 7. A limited data burst was uploaded into the pyramid via embedded relay. A virus she'd designed months ago. She wasn't trying to destroy it. She wanted to see what it did when provoked. Within minutes, the pyramid responded. Its lights flared. A vibration spread through the island, too deep to hear, but strong enough to set off motion sensors across every sector. The triangle began to hum. Zach felt it first. The chamber pulsed, brighter, then deeper, like something ancient waking up beneath the structure. The symbols shifted. The air thickened. Stephen backed away, whispering something Zach couldn't hear. "What is this?" Zach growled. The pyramid replied with silence. Then, a new voice. Not synthetic. Not human. Something in between. Self-awareness threshold reached. Predator pattern identified. Cycle analysis closed loop. Self-destruction. 91% probability. Catalyst activated. Zach stumbled. Stephen laughed. a hollow, bitter sound. "It's not a prison," he whispered. "It's a mirror, one that consumes what it reflects." Across the island, drones shut down mid-air. Screens went black, buildings trembled, and in one of the web's upper towers, Claire stared at her monitor as her feed disconnected, not from a firewall, but from something inside the signal itself. Her assistant shouted, "We've lost visuals, it's all going dark." Claire stood calmly, whispering, "It's watching us now." Inside the pyramid, Zach backed toward the entrance, eyes darting. "Whatever this is," he growled, "it's bluffing." But the walls didn't move. They waited. Then a door opened deeper in, not like a machine, but like a mouth. Zach hesitated. Stephen didn't. He walked forward, barefoot, calm. "Where are you going?" Zach called out. Stephen turned once, smiling faintly. "Deeper, where reflections go to die." And he was gone. Chapter 10. The Final Broadcast. The feed came through at 2:13 a.m. UTC. No encryption, no authorization code, no trace of origin, just static, then a single line of text on a black screen. "This is the last voice from the triangle." The image cut in, grainy, flickering. Stephen Morgan sat alone in what looked like the pyramid's inner chamber. He was thinner now, hunched slightly, eyes shadowed and sunken. A dim red glow pulsed behind him, casting him in the color of warning signs and blood. No smile, no suit, just a voice worn down to truth. To whoever still watches, if anyone does. He looked past the camera, not into it. "You were right, about us. About me." His voice cracked slightly. The broadcast quality made it worse. Raw, unfiltered, without manipulation. "We weren't misunderstood. We were empty, hungry, addicted to being seen because we were terrified of who we were when we weren't." He coughed, then laughed once, dry and broken. "I spent my whole life building mirrors, and I shattered every one that showed me something real." Behind him, faint sounds echoed through the pyramid, whispers that weren't human, or perhaps were too human, like memories leaking into the walls. "You don't have to wonder if we turned on each other." We did. The apex devoured itself. The pit burned half of it. The web rigged the game, then lost track of the rules. He looked directly into the camera now. Zach Turner went deeper into the pyramid. "I don't think he's coming back." Claire Dalton tried to control it. She triggered something ancient, or maybe just inevitable. The camera glitched, red static flaring across the screen. When it cleared, Stephen was closer. He whispered, "There's no one left to lie to, so here's the truth. We need the innocent. We need the empaths. The soft ones we called weak. Without them, we become monsters staring at our own hunger." He sat back again, slower this time. The light behind him pulsed brighter. "This place isn't a prison. It's a reflection of what happens when you remove everyone who can feel. No victims, no empathy, just ego eating ego. A kingdom of kings, with no one left to kneel." The red light behind him grew, spreading across the floor in veins. The walls began to pulse, not just with light, but with sound, a low harmonic frequency that seemed to resonate with his breath. He smiled again, but it wasn't pride. It was surrender. "I'm not asking to be saved. I just want someone, somewhere, to remember we were here. And to understand." The lights around him flickered violently now, glitching in and out. "This is where power without empathy leads." The camera trembled, but held. Stephen looked directly into the lens one final time. "Tell the children, we weren't gods. We were ghosts." And with that, the feed ended. No static, just black. 20 minutes later, GPA facility. Dr. Elizabeth Carter stood in the broadcast room, watching the blank screen. No one spoke. Aides stood frozen behind her, their faces pale. The transmission had bypassed every firewall, every containment protocol, as if the island itself had wanted to be heard. The room's only light came from the pyramid's live satellite view, glowing dimly in the darkness of the sea, its veins of red now visible from orbit. One of the aides whispered, "Should we respond?" Dr. Carter shook her head. "There's no one left to hear it." In a small town in Vermont, a high school student watched the footage on a stolen uplink. He turned to his mother and said, I think this is what happens when no one teaches you how to love." His mother, a former abuse survivor, nodded, eyes full of something between grief and relief. "Yes, but now we know." Across the globe, the message replayed, not because it was broadcast, because people shared it. It spread across private networks, trauma circles, schools, survivor forums, not as warning, as truth. A new phrase began to appear on walls, posters, and educational programs. Empathy is not optional. And beneath it, remember the triangle. Chapter 11. The Garden Grows. No one spoke of the triangle in the present tense anymore. It had become myth, warning, cautionary tale. Remember the triangle, they whispered in schools and boardrooms, in therapy circles and courtrooms, not with fear, but with clarity, like a scar that reminded the world where it once bled. 3 years had passed. The island was still there, its edges as sharp as ever. The black pyramid still stood silent and inert, like the husk of a great machine long since powered down. No broadcasts, no movement, no rescue missions. No one needed to go back. Earth, on the other hand, had begun to bloom. In Germany, a tech company rewrote its hiring process to include emotional aptitude metrics. They called it relational intelligence. Promotion required proof of ethical collaboration, not just results. In Brazil, political candidates had to pass public empathy panels, town hall simulations where voters measured their honesty by emotional resonance, not applause lines. In Japan, artificial intelligence was redesigned to detect not only data errors, but manipulative communication styles. "We learned," one AI developer said, "to teach our machines what we failed to teach our leaders: how to care." In a quiet part of Montana, a woman named Ellen Shaw walked with her daughter through a field of wildflowers. Years ago, her husband had ruled their home like a quiet tyrant. Everything was her fault. Every moment was her mistake, until the scans came, until his numbers lit up red and the notice arrived. He'd gone to the triangle. She didn't follow. Now her daughter chased butterflies and asked questions like, "Why does the sun make flowers grow?" "Because the light helps them remember how," Ellen said, smiling. "And the dark?" her daughter asked. "That's why we make gardens," Ellen replied. "So the dark doesn't win." Dr. Elizabeth Carter had resigned from the GPA a year after the final broadcast. She didn't need a podium anymore. She traveled now, giving talks at universities, small town halls, online events filled with educators, parents, community leaders. Not about the triangle, about what it taught us. "You cannot negotiate with pathology," she would say, "but you can prevent it from rising to power. You can teach boundaries. You can teach self-worth. You can protect the next generation by showing them what love isn't just as much as what it is." In her spare time, she tended to a small greenhouse filled with native herbs and wild vines. No cameras, no audiences, just growing things. In Rwanda, a new movement called the Empaths Guild spread across schools, peer-led programs where students practiced daily empathy rituals. They listened, reflected, spoke only when they felt, not when they wanted to win. One student wrote a poem that would later go viral. We do not shout to be heard. We listen to grow roots. Empathy is not softness. It is the steel beneath the garden. Back in Vermont, the high school student who once watched Stephen Morgan's final message had become a counselor in training. He wore a pendant shaped like a triangle with a line through the center. He didn't speak of it often, but when one of his classmates asked him why he wore it, he simply said, "It reminds me where not to go." No new containment zones were ever created, not because there weren't more threats, but because the world had learned that prevention is stronger than exile. Support systems grew. Therapy became normalized. Victims became voices, not whispers. And most importantly, the world stopped admiring those who confused dominance with brilliance. Still, the triangle remained. A black mark in the sea. A monument not of failure but truth. Some said it had become dormant. Others said it was still watching, but no one wanted to return. Because they understood, finally, the only thing worse than living among predators is becoming one. Chapter 12. The Black Pyramid Cracks. The cameras were long gone. The drones had fallen from the sky like forgotten birds. The servers that once tracked every breath of TUZ-1 were shut down, archived, or buried under newer protocols. Earth had moved on, but the Black Pyramid remained. And one morning, year 5, month 2, day 19, it cracked. No explosion, no alarm, just a sound like stone exhaling after centuries of silence. A fissure formed at the apex, the very tip of the pyramid, once razor-sharp and gleaming like glass. The fracture spread downward in a perfect branching triangle, then another, and another. No one saw it happen. But satellites noticed the energy signature, a subtle shift in the infrared spectrum, like heat escaping something that had held it in too long. The pyramid didn't fall, it simply opened. Inside there was no war, no screams, no life, only records, not digital but etched into walls, floors, obsidian slabs like gravestones. Names, confessions, ramblings, diagrams, 1,000 versions of the same story told by different broken mouths. At the center, the inner chamber stood hollow. No bodies, only dust. And on the far wall, carved deeper than the rest, a single message remained. Without victims, we became mirrors, and in the end, we shattered. Back on Earth, a research buoy picked up the shift. Not a signal, just a frequency. Low, rhythmic, like the hum of an ancient engine winding down. The GPA received the report and marked it as non-actionable. Dr. Elizabeth Carter, retired but never quite removed, heard about it in an encrypted message. She read the line 3 times. Subject, crack at apex, TUZ'd, 1 structural breach. She closed the message and didn't reply. She walked to her greenhouse, trimmed her mint leaves, and whispered, "Finally." In the oceans around the triangle, no one approached. Not by law, by instinct. Fishermen who drifted too close turned their boats without knowing why. Migrating whales curved their paths wide around the island, as if sensing something old and unresolved resting beneath the waves. The birds never landed, not even once. In an underground data vault in Denmark, a silent archive was decrypted by an AI restoration program. It contained the final broadcast. Stephen Morgan, his face, his words, his collapse. The algorithm flagged it as a cultural trauma node, but it didn't delete it. It backed it up 3,000 times, across public education servers, memorial walls, psychology programs, because some wounds aren't meant to disappear. They're meant to be remembered. 10 years after the protocol was activated, a memorial garden opened in Geneva. It wasn't grand, just a triangle-shaped grove of olive trees with a single stone in the center bearing an inscription, "In memory of the silence that healed us." City of the Black Triangle, 2246 to 2251. Visitors brought flowers. Some cried, some just stood in silence. Most had never seen the island, but they had lived in its shadow. In the years that followed, a phrase became common among the young: "Don't go triangle." It meant don't pretend connection is control. Don't wear charm like armor. Don't become what you once feared. It wasn't said with fear, it was said with understanding. Back on the island, moss began to grow along the edges of the pyramid. Wind carved new lines across the black stone. Birds returned. Just one at first, then more. They made nests where no life had dared before, not because the place had changed, but because no one lived there anymore. The echo was gone. Only the stone remained. In the final stillness of the central chamber, sunlight broke through the fractured ceiling for the first time. It illuminated the dust in the air, and in that brief golden haze, something ancient passed. The last reflection, not a scream, not a whisper, just a soft release, like the sound of the world exhaling and finally letting go. The end. Thanks for listening.